Hi, my name is Isabel Cunningham, and for my paper, I chose chapter number 4, Culture and Well Living. The bulk of my paper is made up of comparative studies, and the studies are mostly on traits and strengths and what one country considers valuable compared to another country. Um, some of those studies are one is on subgroups within a country. For example, one was China, it was Hong Kong and Taiwan. I know technically, like, Taiwan's its own thing, but that's what the study said. And another one was about, like I said, country to country, and it was U.S. and Pakistan. And then some other studies I found were about religion and how people within religion act and what words they use compared to people who are, they call it primitive living, but it was basically just like kind of atheist. Like, it's not like your main thing isn't religion. As a starting off point, I did some, I took some text out of the book. There was a little blurb from an article from the Oxford Press about a businessman and a fisherman and how they met. Now the businessman was like, "Oh well, your life isn't that full," but then the fisherman's like, "No, it is." Like, and how they compare and contrast, and basically, like the businessman eventually comes to an understanding and is like, "Oh, like people's way of living is different from mine." Um, yeah. And then I also did a little article on honor culture within the United States. Usually, honor culture is something we associate with Eastern practice, but in the southern states, there is a big honor culture there. Um, and yeah, it kind of, I chose to do it because in the beginning of the book, it talks about how culture is from a Western perspective, and the article talks a lot about how it's funny how we say that psychology is only from the Western perspective, but this Eastern, this thing we associate with the Eastern perspective is in the Western culture, yet somehow we can't put ourselves in their places. So I thought that was really interesting. Why I chose this topic, I really like culture within the soci psychology, the psychology class. Um, I think it's a topic that is overlooked a lot, and it's one of my favorite topics. And usually, it's just like, here's a little thing about culture. Okay, moving on. So I kind of wanted just to sit down and actually learn something about it. And I thought positive psychology, like this class, would be a good place to start about that. Because in the book, it was very open and being like, yeah, we actually don't have it all figured out. It's only from like our perspective and not theirs. So we need to work on that. I thought that was really cool. So that's why I chose it. Okay, next one. A lot of the things I related into my paper were about my grandpa and how he came over from Mexico, and like from what I've been told from him about him moving here and everything. But I also do relate a lot to the people in my life, like the religion I was talking about. I talked about how some people I know chose not to stick with their religion for multiple of reasons, but they chose not to stick with it, but their family still practices, and how they kind of are on a swivel now. And I also talk about how a lot of people flock to religion with grief specifically, but there's also a bunch of reasons why. What I found interesting, pretty much what I said. I just find the idea of culture very interesting and how we don't really think about it, especially in the Western perspective, but it really does have a lot to do with society as a whole, especially in America. Um, Another study I looked at was on Chinese Americans and how their ethnicity, especially after COVID-19, like how they're being discriminated against. I looked at an article about that and how it really, how ethnicity and their culture does help them internalize, like, how to be more confident, I think is a good way to say it. And yeah, okay, bye.